green flag management plan in place, which is what traditionally has been, which is like 100, 200, 300 page document. And this is what we've tried to do, is to make the ones for the Leeds quality, the plan on a page, to be a bit more accessible. But in order to do the green flag assessment, we have to go back to the more traditional, longer winded version. But I will just check my understanding of that with Emma.
Yeah, that's correct. And I've got nothing to add. You've said everything.
As we are, well, most of us who've got major developments in our area know that Section 106 monies are tailing off due to be replaced by SIL monies. And part of the problem with SIL monies...
Councillor Anderson, can you just clarify what SIL is for those people watching on the webcast?
Community infrastructure levy. For every house that's built, X number of thousands of pounds are paid by the developer as compensation to try and meet the infrastructure needs locally. And the way that the council have been doing it is they take approximately 75% of that, goes into a centralised pool, and in the main is used exclusively for flood risk and or education, in the main. The other 25% is passed out to the community, of which some of that, if you've got a parish or town council, the money goes directly to them. So those of us who find that we've got developments taking place have no control over where that money is going to be spent. That was why I was asking you, because you could then maybe go to the parish and town councils and say to them, well, because you know full well they've now been given that money, and would you like to spend some of it? And this is what we can offer you in return, because otherwise you're going to find less and less money available, because your predecessor always used to be coming to us in our area asking, can we have your Section 106 monies, because we've not got any money, parks isn't being funded correctly, we need to get your money in, etc., etc., etc. We need to give you some certainty that there's going to be some funding coming up, because you will raise, certainly in my area, if you were to do the one number 37 Holt Park as an example, if you came and did a plan there and the residents knew that there was a park in existence, they'd be then on to me saying, fine, it's been done, when's it going to be delivered, how much is it going to cost, and where are you getting the money from? And I'm going to have to say, well, sorry, I don't know. It's not a good way. And if you look at a lot of the ones in 1 to 13, they are in areas where I would argue should be prioritised, because there maybe aren't other areas that people can actually relax in. So I'm arguing against myself in the outer area, but the point is trying to look at it strategically. How are you going to get around those things? That you've got 13 there, you've set the councillors who you've worked with have an expectation you're now going to deliver. How are you going to deliver against those 13? Forget about the other 52 that are left. How are you going to meet that expectation on the 13?
I believe that Councillor Rafiq wishes to come in at this point.
Yeah, just to add to what Polly's already said, I think that this is a long-term plan of, as you said, Chair, is going to be delivered by 2032, and it clearly states that this is to be delivered, the plan on a page, in consultation with ward members and the local community. And in terms of funding, I think Councillor Anderson, you've already referred to the very pots of money held by, whether it's parish councils or ward member pots, SIL, Section 106, there will be, or even raising money to by the local communities. And just to give you an example, we've got in Chapel Alton Park a play area opening in a couple of weeks' time, and a lot of that money has been raised by local people there. We put some money in as ward members, whether Section 106 or from our SIL or ward pot, but a lot of that has been raised by the local community. That is partnership, is working with local businesses, and there will be, local businesses. I know there's other areas in the past closer to where I live, where local mums have actually, got together, working with businesses, have raised money as well. and where possible, we could come in as ward members, but also if there are any other central points, so we can do that. So I think you're quite right that there may not be money there at the moment, but with the incoming developments which are in the pipeline, whether it's Section 106 or SIL, there may well be money, which may become available. But I think, the important thing to highlight is this will be done. It's not something that we want to impose on communities. This will be done in consultation with local ward members and the local communities those community parks serve.
Thank you. I think it's worth noting that the plan on a page has short-term and long-term aspirations in there. And as a councillor who got very frustrated at being told computer says no because there's no money, when I've asked for things to be considered and planned for my park, I'm quite happy that this audit does have some forward planning in it without having to be associated with specific monies. And of course, if some members would prefer their audits and plans on a page to be done at the back end of the schedule, I'm sure that could be arranged to avoid expectations being raised with local communities, if that's their wish. I now have Councillor McCluskey.
Thank you, Chair. It's just more the consultation process. I see one of the top, the 13th park is one of the parks in my area, Western Flats. The plan on the page and the accessibility audit were done prior to my election, but I noticed another one is due next year. How is the consultation process put together? Because I get the impression people feel they haven't been involved.
As it says in the document, the 13 that are complete were done as part of the Levelling Up Fund and the Morley Towns Fund bids. So it was a slightly different process. Going forward, what happens is we come up with a draft plan with internal colleagues. So people like the technical officers, so you'll probably know Vicky Nuns or Thuja, and the site managers. They know a lot about what's going on in the community, what the complaints are, what people want to see in those parks. So we put a draft plan together. Then we send that to ward members, because obviously you guys know loads about your communities and what needs doing in the parks. When we get, so from that comes out an initial draft, and then we undertake a consultation process, which will last for a minimum of 3 months. So it'll be online, but there'll also be opportunities to meet the plan on a page officer in the park and talk to them. He'll be like consulting local community groups, Friends of in Bloom. So it's quite wide reaching. There'll be opportunities to respond to paper surveys as well and post them back or whatever. So yeah.
Thank you. It's I was to say, it was before my time, the levelling up process, which we didn't get. But I just want to be assured that we, as members for the area, we'll have advance notice, so I can coordinate with the Friends of groups and the local community. And once they're completed, are those documents accessible from the public's perspective?
Yeah, we aim to make them available online and like in notice boards in the parks. So we'll put them in like that, and obviously share them with local community groups.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on first of all, can I say I do welcome the consultation for Eastern Park, and we have been consulted and it's been brilliant actually. But one question I do have is when we do consultation with member of publics, we're building the hope for those residents and then we don't deliver. I think we need to be very, very careful how we go out there and do consultation. And I think also to follow on Councillor Anderson, yes, we do consider Section 106 money as well, and also the SIL. What conversation has been taken with, because there's a lot of local neighbourhood plans being drafted as well, What conversation are you having with those neighbourhood plans? That's one. And then I'm going to follow for a few other questions, Chair.
So the area teams are consulted as well. So they'll be the ones who are developing the neighbourhood plans, I think. I'm not quite sure what they're called, but we are working with other council officers in the area.
Emma, I'll just clarify. The neighbourhood plans that I think Councillor Khan is referring to are neighbourhood development plans, which are delivered by neighbourhood fora, which are community organisations, which are given a statutory recognition through the Localities Act, I think, that came in about 2013. So they provide local development plans which become supplementary planning guidance and take into account an entire community's attitudes towards developing of housing, green space and facilities.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. We can look further into that.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah. The other one on section 106 and SIL, because there are some developments taken on the boundary of different wards, joining two wards, but however, the developments going to be in different ward, but the park's going to be in different ward as well, just other side of the boundary. But once the development's completed, the residents will be accessing the park on the other side, where the money is not going to be spent. What relationships or what plans do we have? How do that money go to that park, the nearest park, for that development? Because my understanding is section 106 is if you got development in your ward, the money stays in the ward. It doesn't go the other different wards.
My understanding is that's negotiated at the time of the planning in terms of where it's spent. I think that there have sometimes, I've seen examples of where ward members have been flexible and those discussions have gone back with developers on examples like that. But I think that's really got to be ward member led in terms of being prepared to spend it outside of their ward for the benefit of the community.
But Polly, you know, the ward I represent, Bermontos Richmond Hill, is one of the most deprived ward. And if there's a development in my ward and the neighbouring ward's got a park, do you think I, as elected member, will I say, no, I don't want that money, it needs to go there? It will not happen. I think it needs to happen. We need to have a plan, you know, but James needs to take this away, actually, to the leadership, seeing how we can make sure channel that money without the consultation, because, you know, the developments taking place in that ward, the park's going to be far away for
Councillor Khan,
yeah,
I think you're drifting into planning areas,
but it's important.
And we can take this conversation outside of the room today, and we can include it as a recommendation within our scrutiny. But I think those discussions are ones that need to be taken on a planning level.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just finally, Chair.
Can you? There are other members waiting to ask a question, Councillor Khan. So if you have a further question, I'll come back to you later on. So now we've got Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for the reports. And as a dad of 4 young ladies, delighted that we are looking to improve access for women and girls. Question, is it our position that these concepts are already in place within the key city parks, those priorities around accessibility? So places like Golden Acre and Otley Shevin, that places like that, that these principles are already embedded and in place?
They're new guidelines. So some of the stuff is stuff that was already in kind of the consciousness of the sector. So stuff like having open sight lines at entrances so you can see where you're going, you can see what's coming up. That's stuff that we've been doing for a while. But some of the guidelines are new and stuff that we're like implementing now where we can. So things like provision for teenage girls, focusing on asking them what they want and looking at opportunities to provide stuff aimed at them in particular, like social seating and swings. That's something that we're moving forward with. So it's not all in place in the city parks, but it's something we're now more aware of thanks to the research.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how ideas about making sure we've got safe accessibility sit when we then looking at, for example, charging for parking in certain parks, which then may push people away from parking safely in a car park to parking somewhere where they don't have to pay, which may be less safe almost by definition. If we're about safety and accessibility, I'm struggling to square that circle. Thank you.
I think obviously you're referring to the consultation that was launched yesterday around the 2 car parks. Obviously we'll take on board any comments that come back on that. But, you know, if we think about Golden Acre, that there's not, you know, masses of sort of closed in spaces around that for people that they would be parking that I would think would be unsafer, but we'd have to look at each individual circumstance. The idea of that charging is that fundamentally it's helping us to improve the quality of the parks, and some of that may be in fact implementing some of the accessibility things where we don't have that capital funding available, so it allows us to put that into place.
Just for clarification, do disabled spaces get charged in a charged car park?
No, they don't.
Councillor Actor.
So thank you, Chair. Most of the things have been asked before me. When you're a last speaker, it's always you struggle. But with regards to the planning, and that's something I think we need to pick up on the later stage. I find that some parks have restricted Section 106 money, which means that we cannot spend that particular money elsewhere in our pocket parks because that money has been already ring fenced for this particular park. For example, Woodhouse Moor is the one in our ward where majority of the money which comes from Section 106 agreement and the rest, it goes into that park. But while other parks are basically being neglected. But however, saying this, I would like to put this on record that Little London and Woodhouse Ward have a very good relationship with our Parks and Countryside officers, and we have a regular meetings and just in a process of investing a lot of money, not only from Section 106 agreement, but also from our ward-based initiative money as well. So we do have a good relationship, consultation on a regular on a basis, and also the work has been done. But nevertheless, again, this is outside this meeting, Chair, something needs to be done about the restricted 106 money. So at least the members then can invest money other pocket parks as well.
Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there needs to be maybe conversations within planning. Then, if monies are going to be ring fenced to a particular nearest park, then and if members want and that park doesn't need it, for instance, then members need to have those conversations, ward members or neighbouring ward members, to see where that could go. And I'm sure Councillor Actor, as one of the plans panel chairs, you could have a valuable input into that. But that's something, you know, I'm happy to, and I'm sure as Chief Officer Polly is happy to have input accordingly.
I think, Councillor Actor, we can also take the opportunity to raise this in the community committee review, as the community infrastructure levy, which is associated with local decision making, is one which is controlled by community committees such as the one you chair. So if you feel that you don't have any, oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, there's somebody taking over now. I am concerned if you didn't feel you had any influence on how that money is distributed. So that's a really good one for us to put in our recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Actor.
I feel that I mean, Woodhouse Moor is a park that requires a lot of money all the time. I am not saying that that money needs to be utilized elsewhere. What I'm saying is this: we should be given a flexibility where we can spend money elsewhere as well. But Woodhouse Moor definitely needs more attention too.
Thank you. I'd just like to bring in our guests that introduced our presentation earlier. But there's a lot of discussion here about the tension between the local and the professional. So can you let us know how much consultation you did or involvement you had with local young women and girls around what you did?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for bringing me in. So I led the research that informed the guidance principles that have been set out here today. And this was a project based across West Yorkshire, so across the 5 districts of West Yorkshire. And it was a project involving to explore women and girls' perceptions of safety in parks, what makes them feel safe, what makes them feel unsafe, and why, to really include their lived experiences of these spaces, because as we know, women and girls are experts on their subjective safety in these spaces, how they're using them, whether they're using them because it's busier or less busy. We spoke to 67 women from diverse backgrounds, aged 18 to 84, and 50 teenage girls aged 13 to 18. And we spoke to them about the wide range of factors that might influence their perceptions of safety to see what was important to them, whether there were things that were important across women and girls. So we're not a homogenous group. we are different. We have different perspectives, and subjective safety is something that can change according to different characteristics, not just being a woman or a girl. So we identified factors that were similar, where women and girls had similar opinions that would make parks feel safer. Things like the presence of other women in these spaces was the strongest thing that emerged from our research that made these spaces feel safer, alongside activation and programming of these spaces. So alongside these wonderful design things that are going on in these plans, also programming and activation is really important to that. And then, as I said, when we are a range of people with different interests and different needs in the spaces. So some things were really important to some groups of women and less important to others in making us feel safe. So it was across West Yorkshire, not just in Leeds, 67 women, 50 teenage girls, and also those involved in designing and managing those spaces as well.
And following the work that was done, were there any recommendations made in terms of how I'm trying to think of the word now, how the methodology that you followed could be articulated by local authorities when they're doing such audits as this, i.e., are there specific people that they need to include to ensure that all those viewpoints are adequately taken into consideration?
So we were really fortunate to work with women's centres across West Yorkshire, facilitated by West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And this meant that we spoke to women and girls who were using parks and women and girls who are not using parks, who present a range of barriers. So I spoke to one woman, for instance, who hadn't been to the park she lived in for the decade that she'd lived here. And so there were a different set of barriers and issues for that woman than there were for other women who'd been using it and wanted, for instance, to extend their use after dark when it was a key route walking home from work, for instance. So I think there are different sets of issues for different women, and engaging a variety of perspectives, users and non-users, and working with local women's organisations and groups is really important to get that wide spectrum of opinion. We used a method whereby we had statements that women and girls could agree or disagree with, and then we could rank those to see which ones were really important to different groups.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I represent Crossgates and Winmore Ward, and we have 2 parks in, but one is a very popular park, Manston Park, which is used by people from outside of our ward. And I have not heard anybody say, girls or women, that they've been surveyed. So which particular areas have you surveyed and how have you picked? And is it being done in each ward? Because we have a very active youth service that has teenage girls in and goes in, and nothing, I've heard nothing of anybody being surveyed.
Can I just come in, just to clarify, Councillor Graham, the work that has been taken forward under the study is a West Yorkshire wide study, and therefore wouldn't be expected to cover all the wards within the Leeds district, for instance.
I appreciate that, Chair, but I'd just like to know, thank you, if there's been anything done, in especially in my area, that's Leeds 15 that comes under.
So we didn't take a park-based approach because there are lots of parks across West Yorkshire. But so we took an approach of working with different women's centres in different in the 5 different districts, and we did individual interviews with women and two focus groups in each of the districts. So they weren't park based specifically, but they were based on capturing the diverse views and lived experiences of women and girls.
Thank you for that, but that's comes over different to the report, but thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. At this point, I'd just like to bring in Jeff Turnbull from an equalities perspective. The audits are effectively an asset management audit, and they look at things mostly, as opposed to people's lived experience. And I'm interested to know at what point equality impact assessments would be appropriate for implementation. So, for instance, does an equality impact assessment only take place at the point where this policy is decided, or would we expect each park in its audit being taken place should be including an equality impact assessment there? So, for instance, I'll give you a proper example. On my local parks, there's been significant concern around nettles and brambles, which are encroaching on footpaths and therefore will impede the progress of people who have limited mobility, the elderly, people who have limited vision. However, that's a policy which is intentionally being put in practice because such lack of maintenance is meant to encourage increased biodiversity. And when we've asked for interventions from park staff on site, the response is, oh, that's not on my schedule, I can't do it. So we've done it ourselves in terms of clearing it. Would an equality impact assessment, therefore, be able to respond to such pressures to say, you might have facilities and infrastructure in place, but the maintenance of that is equally as important? Sorry, that's a very long question of you, Jeff, but I just thought it was useful.
I'll just unpick that into a couple of different sections, if that's okay. So I'm glad you've raised due regard and equality impact assessments, because I was going to come in and talk about this actually. So in terms of the work that is being done around plans on a page and that particular aspect, so what you would see would happen there is obviously there's consultation engagement which has to feed into the due regard anyway. It's part of our giving due regard is talking to people, and that gives you some of your evidence base. But in this instance, you're doing your access audit, there's consultation engagement taking place, a plan is produced. We're already saying at the moment there might not be resources to deliver all of those plans at this stage. So obviously you've considered equality and diversity through the access audit and also through talking to local residents. At the point where it would become a formalized process would be if funding is established and a decision-making process takes place. So that would be kind of almost your end of the process check and challenge. In terms of the other issue that you've raised, and it is an issue that I'm aware of, I think when it comes to due regard, when we were making a decision a while ago now in terms of management of green spaces, in terms of doing less cutting back for environmental reasons, if that was a policy and that was a formal decision-making process, it would have had due regard attached to it. But one thing we have to say is due regard's only as good as what you know at the time. And it's only as good as the evidence you've got and the people involved in that. And sometimes you can have unintended consequences. Due regard is not perfect as a concept. And what you would expect colleagues in the service or any other service to do is if there were unexpected consequences of something. So, for example, the issue for disabled people who are wheelchair users, who are using green spaces, and they are struggling sometimes because they are at the height where overgrown nettles and things are. That's something you expect the service to take on board. They wouldn't necessarily do an impact assessment on it because that's a very formalized process for decisions, but you would expect that they would correct sometimes in terms of the delivery. And I think sometimes people forget that due regard is not just a piece of paperwork that goes to a meeting. There is mitigation, as part of that. There's an action plan as part of it, a full impact assessment. So it's important to continually keep reviewing. Did we actually do what we said we were going to do? And are the impacts actually what we thought when we did the desktop exercise were? So I think that's just a really important point. And that's where members' feedback into the delivery at local level is really important, because sometimes decisions are made and things are planned with the best will in the world, but at a local level, at some part of the city, it might not. There might be some glitches. Yeah, is that okay?
Yes, thank you. I think that's very helpful, Jeff. And we might have another recommendation as a consequence of that discussion. I now have Councillor Maloney and Councillor Harrington afterwards.
Thank you. Just wondering about lighting. Thank you for the audit example. It's Crossflats Park, which I know very well. It's in my ward. But the lighting, does it seem appropriate? Does it help people get from A to B in the dark? When it comes to kind of safety of women and girls, my concern about lighting is that it's very easy to say, let's just light all the paths up, we can go straight across and everything's fine. But with that, you then create shadow as well. So perceived safety of walking down a well-lit path means that then you also have the darkness. And as a woman and knowing women and walking through those very brightly lit paths surrounded by darkness doesn't make me want to walk down that well-lit path. So I'm just wondering how lighting is judged beyond just A to B. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Yes, you've hit the nail on the head. Lighting's very difficult to achieve, and the guidance takes account of exactly what you've raised, the fact that if you light an area, you also create pools of darkness. So what we recommend in the guidance is consulting a lighting specialist who can provide where there is a need for lighting, a sort of gradient of light. So you replicate the sorts of sight lines that you're able to have in the day, and the face of the person approaching you is lit. It's the most difficult section we had in the guidance, not only because it's quite difficult to achieve technically, but also that it costs a lot of money to do that. And you have biodiversity tensions and conflicts as well with lighting a place at night. So really, we find it very difficult to make generalized guidelines for what is actually a national document expected to have a national audience, and now has led to an international audience actually on lighting. But we think on a case-by-case basis, there are certain parks where it may be a useful thing to have, where, for example, there's a key desire line across the park with an anchor, such as a train station, expected to be used until late into the evening. But lighting installations are expensive, and with the climate of kind of funding around parks at the moment, we couldn't expect to have all parks lit. That is definitely not what we're recommending.
Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. Just say thank you for the report. It was a very interesting read. There's just a couple of little bits that I'm questioning or want some more clarification on. So it says that you were looking at, on the audit, it says, are there staff on site? So that's fine, but if you've got a cafe on site, it's not really the cafe owner's responsibility to police the park. There's also an issue in our area that we're trying to install wheelchair-friendly equipment in our parks. But we come up against the situation that if you're going to install certain piece of equipment, the advice is that you have to have a member of staff there to supervise that facility. So there's another link with accessibility for people with disabilities. There's some reference in here that staff may not be wearing dark green uniforms, but might wear more brightly coloured clothing to identify them. So are we then looking that we're going to have more staff actually working in the parks? Because it's all very well saying, oh, it'd be really good to have people there that women can contact if it's going to make them feel safer to see staff there. But where are the staff actually going to come from? Thank you.
So I think, there is a realism that the staffing levels aren't going to change. We're all aware of the financial climate, but I think it's making the most of what we do have. So if we've got staff available, and even if they are staff in cafes, we're not asking them to police, but it just provides that security, doesn't it? That if somebody does feel uncomfortable, they've got somewhere to go. The same as you would if you were out in town and there was an issue in a bar or something, just having people around. And I think the key point that sort of Anna and Helen made is about that presence of people, and especially other women. So if you've got parks where you've got those sort of facilities, they immediately provide a bit of a safer feel to them, and a perception. So that's where I think it came from. But there isn't an intention to increase staffing because there isn't the funding to be able to do that.
Can I ask a question around access barriers? Because there's a tension where a lot of members have had issues with people balaclavaed on electric bikes, and antisocial behaviour. On the other hand, the traditional way of trying to preclude those individuals from public land has been to install A-frames, which have increasingly been barriers to people with mobility issues, and especially on mobility scooters, from actually accessing the park. So we end up inconveniencing law-abiding people to make it better for more able-bodied people. Has the Parks Department come to a conclusion as to what access solutions they would be wishing to promote to elected members, which maximizes the access for all people in the city, at the same time as offering some kind of obstacle to those that wish to make those areas more unsafe universally?
I think it has to be dealt with on a site-by-site basis. So you've got to make a decision about how bad your issues with motorbikes and quad bikes are, to choose your access barriers. There's sort of loose agreement that there's a kind of chicane that you have to work your way around to get into sites. It slows down quad bikes and motorbikes. It makes it more difficult to get into the site, and mobility scooters can get into the site. So that's the recommended access barrier now. But if you've got a lot of really bad problems with off-road vehicles, you might need to use something a bit more robust.
So that's a no then. There's no particular recommended solution that you've looked into and you're recommending?
I mean, there's been a lot of conversations on this, like long meetings, and I don't think there has been a conclusion.
I think it's almost like an impossible problem, isn't it? Because you're trying to prevent something that's quite narrow coming onto site while still allowing something quite wide to come on site. So I think, you know, we try and find ways around it like Emma's described, but the reality is it is an impossible outcome because you're preventing two opposites.
Councillor Actor. Councillor Stables.
It's actually just going back to a point made earlier about parish councils and town councils and linking up with them. So I think this is a really good document, Safer Parks, and I'm just wondering whether that information has been or is being sent out to parish councils and town councils.
I don't think we have, but I'm more than happy to take that away as an action.
Councillor Khan, did you want to round the discussion off?
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity. I just want to say I do welcome the consultation and, you know, the proposals for our parks. And I think the last 3-4 years ago, as you know, parks and green spaces have been really, really important in our life, and especially during pandemic. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart to the staff at working at parks and, you know, for bringing those parks up to a standing and making us feel safer in those parks and keeping us healthy as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rafiq.
Yeah, just, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Barker for all the work that you've done in terms of the safety, in particular for women and girls, and I'm sure we'll be taking your recommendations going forward. But you know, just to reiterate, Chair and the members of the board, that this is an important part of our work going forward, and I think accessibility, safety, and making sure the parks are welcoming and familiar for all will be central to everything we do in consultation with ward members and the local communities as we move through this important piece of work, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rafiq. And I just want to say thank you very much for all the people that have come along today to discuss this with elected members. This was a key priority for us at the beginning of the year when we set our work programme. And we are very keen to ensure that all that money that's been invested in the study for the protection of women and girls from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority has the opportunity to be practically delivered within our green spaces here in the city. And that's why we welcomed the development of the access audit and the future involvement of elected members in that. And we look forward to working with you in the future once we've produced our recommendations. So thank you very much. You may now leave if you don't wish to listen to the next item. The next item is Item 8, homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, where we have James Rogers with us, and also, of course, patiently in the wings, we've had Gerard Tinsdale, who's interested to introduce himself earlier. And I believe it's Kerry. I haven't got the surname.
It's Murray, Councillor. Kerry Murray.
Kerry Murray, thank you for your patience as well. We look forward to discussing the homelessness strategy with you. Who would like to introduce the item first?
I'm happy to do that. Thank you for inviting me here this morning. I'm sure most of you have read the strategy, but it's quite a long document, but so I thought it might be quite useful for me to just give you a bit of an overview of the highlights of the strategy. So we're legally required to publish a homelessness and rough sleeping strategy at least once every 5 years. And this one is been designed to be the strategic framework for the city with our response to how we prevent homelessness. It sets out the council's 4 ambitions and the emerging themes and priorities. And it's been identified in the city in consultation with the Homelessness Prevention Forum. So during 2022, through the Homeless Prevention Forum, This partnership is made up of over 60 third sector organisations, registered providers and people with lived experience. In January 2023, we did a homeless review and we looked at all our data post both pre and post pandemic, and this picked up on the main causes of homelessness and predicted trends. So the strategy has 4 ambitions. All are underpinned by a culture of prevention and early intervention, and this is to maximise the amount of time we have to support people who are experiencing homelessness. And the ambitions have been set to achieve the best outcomes for everyone, but equally target groups of people who have been identified as being either under or overrepresented. Universal prevention is the first one, and this is about how we maximise education on homelessness across the city at the earliest stage and to increase awareness. The ambition is that we'll see our services and partners being accessible and welcoming, and it's really key that we promote people to speak with us as early as possible rather than at the point of crisis. So one example that we've been working on over the last 6 months is a self-help called Advice Aid. And this is a digital solution where people can put their homelessness or their housing details in, and they'll get a tailored response, and they'll be signposted as to where to go. And so far, over 3,000 customers have actually used Advice Aid. The second ambition is targeted prevention. We know that the biggest reason for homelessness in Leeds, and both nationally, is friends and family asking households to leave the home. Whilst as a city we have a nationally recognised high prevention rate, we still need to strengthen this. We need to continue looking at our data and finding ways in which we can reach out to customers, even before they may even realise that they themselves may need homelessness support in future. So some of the data that we've been looking at has identified that Black British, Caribbean and Black African communities are overrepresented in Leeds in the number of homeless applications that we've received. So we've highlighted 3 postcodes in the city. We're still analysing this data, and we're going to have a look at how to successfully reach these communities, but most importantly, how to have the greatest impact. Third ambition is around intervention, recovery and strong partnership working. The Homeless Prevention Forum has identified 4 key themes. These are repeat and hidden homelessness, having the right services working in the right way, providing the right accommodation and making it accessible, and the health and wellbeing support. A new chair has recently been elected to the forum, and later this month it is going to meet to progress the themes. One of the areas that we've been working on most recently is a partner assessment form. And this is a form that we have created so that people who are experiencing trauma can have that information collected only once. So the information that we're statutorily required to collect can be done at the point of engagement, rather than people having to just continually talk to varying organisations about their life experiences or things that they've been through. The 4th ambition is a shared and integrated approach to our building on our housing offer in the city. Availability of accommodation is a pressure point, both in social and affordable private sector housing. We want to continue building on the right mix of accommodation and maximise the number of landlords in our letting scheme. The 3 things that we've been working on over the last 3 months are reviewing the attractiveness of the private rented scheme. We've done a survey out to landlords and we've had over 1,600 responses, which we're currently reviewing. We've increased the number of family properties available by over 50% for those most in need of emergency accommodation, and we'll continue to work on increasing this further still. And we're continuing to build on our variety of offer across the city in partnership with providers. Ashler House for single males and the RSAT properties for rough sleepers are recent additions. So in summary, our ambitions are set in partnership. Their aim is to achieve the highest prevention outcomes,
customers approaching the service at the earliest possible opportunity where we can help the most, not seeing continued increase in temporary accommodation numbers and maximising the availability of accommodation. The two frameworks that we're going to be looking at to see how successful our strategy is. And this is the number of applications we'll take at prevention point, so before a person becomes homeless, but also our positive prevention ratio. So how well do we do in stopping a household becoming homeless? And we'll use these metrics to monitor the success of the strategy over the next 6 to 9 months and review it annually. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I open it up to members. Councillor Graham.
Just a comment really on the biggest issue we have now in my ward, Crossgates and Winmore, is the private rented. And I just had a case this week where I can't think of the word now, problems, but she'd lived in this property for 15 years and the owner, he'd passed away and it had gone to the son and he was selling it. So she's homeless then, but there's many cases of that. So I think that's the thing. And obviously we don't have, because in Winmore, when a property becomes empty, council, there's up to 500 bids put in for them. So it's not an easy issue to address, is it? That's just a comment to I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Councillor Anderson.
Can I just start by welcoming the work that you've done here, because yes, you are nationally recognised for the good work that you've done. You've been very, very successful. All of us probably have got problems in our wards with homelessness, but what I would say is at least you've put down a strategy. Now you're going to be held to account as to whether or not you can deliver the strategy, but that's good from that point of view. The query I've got is on page 42 of our papers, page 4 of your strategy about Gypsy and Traveller community. I speak as a Scrutiny chair who the Scrutiny board a number of years ago did an inquiry into Gypsy and Traveller within the city, and Gate at the time welcomed what we came out with, but we've still got a problem. Because when it came to the site allocations plan, the council, it was pointed out that the council didn't have enough space in order to do it. Now, in 2005, when the Conservative, Liberal, Greens took over, a report ended up in our hands, which meant that the Labour Council previously had identified a number of sites where these could go. The report was then taken off of the administration because it had been provided for a specific purpose. Is there still a site plan? Have you still got a list of sites citywide as to where there might be these facilities going? Because we need to do something about it. I mean, in Councillor Graham's area recently, well, not specifically in her area, but in the East Orbital, there has been an increase in Gypsy and Traveller sites coming along, and you've had to spend a lot of money in terms to clear them. So we need to do something about it. The fact is, it's not an issue that can go away. It's not an issue you can go away. So what plan, have you got a strategy for sites that you're considering? And if so, can we start talking about them? Because we need to do something about it. So, and how do we solve this Gypsy and Traveller issue, because we do need to provide more sites.
Thank you, Councillor. And yeah, we do have some challenges in being able to support gypsies and travellers that come to Leeds. There is, I believe, 4 areas in the city that are currently marked on the site allocation plan. And we've been looking at those and we've been doing some work, and we did bid for some funding to develop one of those sites. And I lose track of time since the pandemic, but I think it was late last year, and unfortunately we weren't successful in that funding for it. So we're still trying to identify some funding. We know there's a need to increase the sites, and that's something that we're keen on doing.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for this report. I would like to ask, actually, I mean, in terms of who is at risk of homelessness, there's a mention of overrepresented and underrepresented groups. Now, it's easy to understand why there should be a focus on overrepresented groups. I'm just wondering, with the underrepresented, are we saying here that there's a suspicion that the stats available to us aren't telling the full story? I mean, I know with often the expression hidden homelessness is used. I'm just thinking here that there may be a sort of a feeling that there are things that we don't know, and there's sort of other stuff that's not getting into the data, that there are groups that appear to be underrepresented, but still are still a cause for concern. Is that the case? Thank you.
Thank you. So when we looked at our data analysis, in terms of sort of gender identity, we had a large, I think it was 65% of people didn't want to answer the question. And that immediately made us ask the question, why? Why is that? Is it because people don't want to answer the question, or is it because, is it because people don't want to answer the question? Do they think it's going to make a difference to, how they're, I suppose, treated by homelessness services? And we took that sort of question to the Homeless Prevention Forum. And as a consequence of speaking to people there, with lived experience, it was sort of felt that at that point, people from LGBTQ plus backgrounds, particularly young people, were maybe not aware of housing options and what we could do to help there. And maybe with this particular group of people, it could be hidden from the data that we were collecting. So we've made a really concentrated effort to go to the LGBTQ plus cafe, expand our knowledge as a service about the services that are out there, such as like the NHS gender groups, things like Skyline, I think JIDS is another one. And as a consequence of us as a service going out and finding out information, that is an area that we're really working on to improve. We've also done some training with our staff, so they're more informed and upskilled to ask the right questions in the right way. So it's all sort of work that we're doing at the moment, and we're continuing to develop on. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah. So when you say underrepresented, it is particularly minorities in terms of sexuality and gender identity that you were thinking of, specifically those groups. Any others?
No, I think it is just those groups. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Councillor. Oh, sorry. Do you have a supplementary, Ron?
If Chair will permit me, there's just one very quick thing. It's something I noticed that wasn't in the report, and it's something that you often hear by way of anecdotally. Is there any evidence that veterans, former forces people are overrepresented among the homeless community?
I would have to come back to you on the exact detail in terms of numbers, but not to my knowledge. We do have specific workers who work with ex-armed forces leavers and work with the agencies that are, working with ex-army leavers, and that work is done regionally. But in terms of the actual figures, in terms of those figures, I would have to come back to you on that because I don't have that detail.
Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
It's a follow on from Barry's comment, actually. The fact of it is, if we all live in the real world, we know there is not enough provision in the city for travellers. And we also know the moment anybody would suggest putting a site in one of our wards, we'd all jump up and down and we get everybody carrying on. But at some point, we have to get past that. And I remain concerned because in effect, by not grasping that, what we're actually doing is we're creating temporary sites that sometimes are left in a mess, sometimes not. But do we have any strategy to look at how we can get this into place? Because I'm concerned that we're just, all we're doing is, and for the last, as long as I've been here, probably, that's just been passed down that line and we've not actually grasped it. I'm only aware of one site. I'm told there's 2 in Leeds, but from what I can see, the provision needs to be more than that. So is there any strategy to how we could actually get to a position where we could actually accommodate these people?
Yeah, as I said earlier, it certainly is a challenge for the city, and I'm aware of some of the issues that you've raised, and particularly the expense in clearing up. We are continuing to look and see.
Gerard, could you get a little bit closer to the microphone?
Sorry, Chair. We are continuing to look and see if we can make use of the sites that have been allocated. But I think in the meantime, what we need to do maybe a little bit more of is consider negotiated stopping, where we work with local members, identify sites that are not used on a permanent basis, but used on a temporary basis. And we agree that with yourselves, with the traveller groups, and timescales for them to vacate while we try and pick up these more permanent sites, because we're always going to have that throughput of travellers within the city. The permanent sites are very much that, permanent sites for people that want to remain here. So it can end up being 2 separate issues as well.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Can I also welcome this homeless and rough sleeping strategy? And I think it's timed really nicely because recently in the media, people will, residents feel like prisoners and unsafe in multi-storey blocks because we do have rough sleepers. And a lot of residents, because at the ward I represent, we've got one of the most multi-storey blocks in our ward. And that's where we start seeing some increase in rough sleeping in those multi-storey blocks. And what's happening is they're causing a lot of nuisance and mess for other services when they're already strained. My question is, say, for instance, if rough sleeper does not want our service or wants support from us as Leeds District Council, what avenues do we have, and how can they get help from some other partners?
Thank you. So we have increased our outreach offer in terms of rough sleepers, because we do know that there are sort of issues with rough sleepers, particularly around sort of weekends and evenings. And when you mentioned the multi-stories, that was something that has been flagged up. So our outreach offer has been extended to support rough sleepers that are found, during the evening and weekends. We are quite successful in terms of getting rough sleepers into accommodation, and we work really closely with other organisations such as Forward Leeds, and other accommodation providers. We have the navigators as well, which are from Barker. So there is sort of a wraparound support for rough sleepers, and often it may well be that the help they need with their health or their drug or their alcohol addictions is the first thing that is tackled, and then they will come into accommodation. So the street outreach offer is quite robust.
Briefly, the outreach service, Circle Sport, is that available 24, 7 days a week, or is it just on the Monday to Friday, 8 while 8? And what happens on the weekend? If a resident gets in touch with us, how do we get in touch with those organisations?
So the street outreach offer has been extended to evenings and weekends. So at the moment it's a 7-day-a-week offer. I don't have the contact details to hand, but there are ways in which you can report rough sleepers to StreetLink, which our CGL outreach team pick up, and then they can go directly directly to the rough sleeper. But I can share those contacts with you.
Thank you. Can I ask a different question concerning multi-stories? I'm looking at page 46, and that's talking about temporary accommodation. And it talks about the rise in demand, you know, comparing December 2021 and December 2022. And what's significant is that a lot of the households that are presenting to you and are having to be put up in temporary accommodation are single households. Meanwhile, there is an agenda item in this week's, at the next executive board, which is discussing the demolition of high-rise accommodation, which the council feels has come to the end of its use, and rather than refurbishing, they wish to demolish. But within the report, it talks about how this is council accommodation which will not be likely to be replaced for several years to come. And the majority of our single person accommodation is through our traditional high-rise properties. So what effect do you think that will have on the supply going forward for people who are presenting as homeless and having to go into temporary accommodation in terms of their ability to move on into more permanent homes?
I think a simple answer, councillor, would be it is going to put additional pressure on the service. Should that report be agreed at exec board this week, it's going to take out about 360 units. So I don't think there's any other answer than yeah, it's going to put pressure on us on a service to help people. We're planning for that. We're looking at different things that we can do. We're looking at our allocation policy and seeing how we can tweak that to make sure that we focus on the most vulnerable moving forward. You're already aware we've suspended the debt registration quota and the transfer quota that we had in there to make sure those in most need are helped, and we'll continue to do that. But I don't think I could just sit here and say that it's not going to cause a pressure. I mean, the ultimate aim from this is to replace those blocks with much better, higher quality homes. But you're right, it's going to take us a few years at least to do that. It's potentially going to take us a couple of years to empty the blocks and get them down before we can start looking to replace them.
Yeah, James, I'll bring you in. Is there therefore, given the pressure which is there from the homelessness end, consideration to be had that the demolition could be delayed while that pressure is there?
That's a good question, councillor, and we certainly give that some consideration before bringing the recommendations to executive board. The HRA is in a really difficult financial situation at the moment. We cannot afford to spend the money to make those blocks decent, and we have an obligation on the people living in there to make sure that they're living in decent properties. We just can't afford to do that, and that's why we're asking exec board to consider the decision that we have.
James Rogers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's just to add to the broader context of this in terms of the report that you're referring to going to executive board next week is about some specific accommodation blocks that we need to find solutions for. We've also got a housing growth strategy for the city, and that is around sort of investment in new social housing, affordable housing, etc. And that programme of activity includes the building of one-bedroom properties. Obviously, that will help, and therefore this whole issue needs to be looked at in the broader context.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stables.
Thank you very much for this report. It's something that I care deeply about, and I'm delighted that all the hard work that's gone into this. I just wanted to ask about what the facilities were for housing for those with addictions Because I know from speaking to people who I know that work at St George's Crypt that one of the issues in terms of rough sleeping, trying to move those people on, is the issues with addictions. I'm just wondering how we manage that, or are going to manage that.
So we have a specific, we got funding for a specific scheme called RSAP, which is the Rough Sleeper Accommodation Programme. And that is essentially a purchasing programme where we've purchased a number of one-bedroom properties specifically for rough sleepers who will often have drug and or alcohol addictions. Those properties are available for people who may go straight from the streets into the properties, and they will get sort of wraparound support from something known as a navigator, which gives really intensive support, but also will work really closely with Forward Leeds for drug and alcohol provision. There's been sort of 5 rounds of RSAP, and we're on the final round, and I think it's around 61 bedroom properties that are being purchased through that scheme specifically for that reason.
Thank you very much. That's really good to hear.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I understand where some properties may need to be demolished because of the work, but I hope we're not going to have situations like we have on York Road with the highways, which some of you will be familiar with, the multi-storey block of flats, which people love living in there. And then the 4-storey, I believe, at the side, that they've been empty for I don't know how many years now. So I hope we're not going to be in that situation again. Thank you.
We're working on a number of blocks other than the highways to empty them at the moment. We've learned a lot in terms of demolition, about how we take down these blocks because they're all the same construction type. So we're confident that when the other blocks are emptied, we'll quickly be able to remove them and then look at options to replace there. So we're not looking to just leave things empty on Estates Council, if that helps.
Councillor Anderson.
On page 63, you talk about the monitoring the success. So you've come up with some key success measures, which is good in itself, because a lot of council departments often come up with strategies, but never put any targets beside them. So you've done that. But have you actually got the baseline figures? You know, so in other words, let's just take the very top one. Ratio of prevention applications accepted. Target is 70% accepted at prevention stage. So where are you just now? Are you at 50, 65? You know, have you actually got calculated the baseline figures out? I'm not asking you to tell me them all just now, but if I was to ask for the baseline figures, have you got them ready so that we can see how far you are away from the targets? Because I would have expected you to probably have softer targets to begin with, and then make the targets more difficult as time goes on. That's what I would anticipate you're going to do. I might be wrong, of course.
So as a service, how we compare nationally in the sort of key metrics, we're sort of probably 20% ahead of the national average. So if we were looking at the number of homeless applications we take at prevention stage, I think we're number 3 of all core cities, which is fantastic. We take around 2% of all homeless applications nationally. So we're well ahead there. In terms of our sort of prevention ratio, which, you know, is around, if I was looking last week, it was 85%. If you were looking at the national average, I think it's around 55%. So in terms of our performance, we're already well ahead of the national average in nearly all areas. But I agree, it's possibly an area that we need to be a little bit clearer on in terms of how we're measuring ourselves for reporting on performance.
Any more questions? Okay, thanks very much. You are free to go. We really appreciate you coming back to update us, and the quality of the report that you produced. It's much appreciated. And it's worth noting that Councillor Lennox did wish to be here. However, she's having to have a period of convalescence. So we look forward to seeing her at our next meeting, if that she's producing a paper on. So on to the next item for board members present. It's the work schedule. Becky.
Can I just ask board members to note the draft work programme on page 83, and if you do have any comments or require any amendments, just to let me know. Thanks a lot.
Date and time of next meeting, are you happy with it? Oh, it's in December. Shall we have a fuddle? Look forward to seeing you then. I look forward to being on time.
Chair, just on the
Councillor Khan.
Yeah, just on local welfare sports scheme review, are we going to be getting some third sector organisation that do provide with us examples? Yes.
Yes.
Do we know who they are?
I don't at this stage, Councillor Khan, but there are partners coming in. I'd have to check my list and come back to you. All right. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time and attention today, colleagues. Enjoy the sunshine.